A few years ago, I ran into a very interesting person at our company cafeteria, and it's my pleasure to introduce her tonight. Her name is Morgane Oger, and she is a human rights activist and an IT leader who has spent much of the time answering difficult questions in public. She spent 25 years working as a high-tech consultant in engineering, finance, and telecom industries, very talented, and is now on the Canadian technology management team of an international big box electronics retailer. We'll guess which one that is. Morgane has a track record of feminist and human rights activism dating back to the 1990s. She focuses on addressing systematic injustice, and her work as a community organizer and change maker is not wildly, but widely recognized for its success reaching the hearts and minds of many detractors. She's a hero, really. And Morgane has helped win significant victory on issues focused around equality and inclusion at municipal, provincial, and federal levels in Canada, successfully winning a precedent-setting human rights case in 2019. I remember that you were so excited then, and that confirmed that a person's charter rights of freedom of expression and core beliefs must be balanced against another person's right to live free of discrimination. Please welcome our speaker for this evening, Morgane Oger, talking about how to deal with difficult questions. And I can't think of a better, more experienced expert. And I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself for a large round of applause for our speaker.
Woohoo! Thank you very much for inviting me to your Advanced Orators Club. It's quite a privilege. I have to admit, you know, it's a little intimidating to go to Toastmasters as basically an autodidact at best. And I am looking very much forward to seeing what the feedback is on this talk. As it was said, I'm an IT manager at Best Buy Canada. I've been working in IT for 25 years as a software consultant around the world. I ran for public office twice. I've had a number of public policy wins, including changing the Human Rights Code in Canada and BC, plus bringing in municipal and provincial public policy, and changing police policy when it comes to its conduct, which, as we know, is a sore point these days. Each one of these required a great deal of communications. And as Louisa kindly mentioned, I'm a human rights activist. That's like in my blood, it seems. Apparently, I'm a descendant of human rights activists, so it's not my fault. Blame my parents and my grandparents. And I've been in leadership for 25 years in corporate, nonprofit, and political contexts. And here I am today to talk about a few things. First, we're going to talk about the mind and the body, preparing and practicing for the situation. We're going to talk about fear, and we're going to talk about the amygdala. We're going to talk about taking back control from the amygdala so you managed the situation in a way that works for you, because that's very, very important in these situations. I need to see something there. I'll see at least this. We are then going to re-get control. We're going to talk about the tools of the trade for managing communications. We're going to talk a lot about the core message. And then we're going to talk about the message box itself. And the message box is how you make sure that your core message gets heard and how you're prepared for the other people's messages, because you want to stay on your core message. And we're going to talk about the Johari Window, which is a model that gives you a lens into essentially understanding and perception, but also into realness and coming across in a way that people understand. Finally, we're going to do some use cases. We're going to go through the key points that I've gathered over time when it comes to going through a job interview, the press interview, which is when you're facing the press, the question and answer session after, for example, a panel, the news conference, which is also always followed by Scrum, And something dear to many people in IT, and also people trying to change public policy, the elevator pitch, when you're trying to get someone to do what you want, and they have the final say about going to the next step. Section 1 is the mind and the brain. Obviously, the single most powerful thing when you go into a conversation of any kind is preparation. You need to know what you're getting into. What that really means is you need to have really thought about why you're doing this, regardless of the context. Maybe you're looking for a job. Maybe you're trying to get elected. Maybe you're trying to convince an elected person to consider your proposal. Maybe you're trying to come up with the latest thing that's going to help society. What are you looking for? And that might be a different thing than why you're doing it. What you're looking for really is all about today, right now, this thing in the moment. What are you specifically asking for? Because typically when you're in a difficult conversation and you have to handle difficult questions, you're asking for something. So this is very important. Obviously, what's your audience looking for? Why are you having this conversation with another person? Why are you even talking at all? The people on the other side of you, whether it's the other side of a dais, or whether it's a camera in your face, or whether it's a room full of people who came to listen to you, or the internet full like today, listening to me, the audience is looking for something, and it's good to have an idea what they're looking for, because you want them to come out of this thinking they got what they wanted. And going into the meeting, of course, do you actually have what you need? And that could mean a lot of things. If I go into a speech where I'm going to be talking to a large room, I'm notorious for having my notes in my hand. I just cannot give a speech freehand without my notes in my hand. I fall to pieces. But at the same time, I can't memorize the speech. If I give off a memorized speech, it comes out clunky, and I get confused, and I can't place hold in my speech. So everybody has the different things that they need. Maybe you have some AV material. Maybe you need Zoom to work and to let you show a slideshow like this. These things, you need to know what they are, and you need to make sure you have them, because if you don't have them, then you're already you're unprepared for the next step, which is the inevitable difficult consequences of your speaking, which is the questions. If people don't ask you questions, it's not a good sign, which is an invitation in this talk that you ask questions. So people are going to ask questions, and you should ask yourself always, what kind of questions are you expecting? It's pretty important, because if you get sideswiped by a question that you didn't expect and you don't have the answer, especially if it's in a context where you're expected to have exactness, sometimes you're expected to have exact answers. Like, for example, maybe in technology, I talk to my directors or my VP, and I have to have an exact answer. And if I don't have the exact answer, I need to be able to say how I'm going to get it. Because in an organization, exact answers are needed to make decisions. But when you're talking, for example, to a large crowd of people, you might be able to prepare for your questions with some boilerplate answers that sound a lot like you're not answering the question. And we're going to get into that later. What are your answers going to be? That's, of course, very important. Are you going to focus on facts? Because then you need to bring the facts in and make sure you have access to them. Whether it's a great big book of facts. And as an example to that, when I've been in campaigns, I have I receive a lot of questions on the policy of the party or of the organization I'm with, and I can't fudge that answer. And so what I do is I bring my policy book with me, and then I can always say, you know what, hang on, have a look. I read on it and I say, okay, this is our policy. So it's basically notes, and sometimes the notes are complex. If anybody's been to school board meetings or parks board meetings or city council meetings, they have the staff there that they can refer to for the exact facts, for example. And it can be easier for them. Now, when you get into the space, whatever that is, whether it's an interview room or whether it's a large room full of people, the feel of the room is very important. Having a moment to yourself and listening to the space, listening to what people might be saying if you can hear it. If you're doing an interview for a job, that moment one-on-one when you identify what they're what you can kind of guess they're thinking, that's really important. It's good to read that and see if you can put it down on the side, on the side next to you, and always kind of have that in mind when you're answering your questions that come up. So now we're going to get into the really, actually, the meat of this, this conversation, which is fear. Fear is what drives a lot of questions and what derails them. And it drives how you answer them and how you have to be prepared. And so I'm going to ask you all to do something maybe unusual, I don't know, for your organization. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, and I'm going to ask you to follow me in a story. Now, you saw on the slide, there was a podium and there was a microphone, and there you are, and visualize you're at a podium with a microphone, and you're speaking at an important event. And this event is really, really important to you. And the room looks really big. And you look around, you can't see one free seat. And you worked towards this for months. This is a really, really important day for you, and you want to make sure it's going to go right. You can't make a mistake tonight. And you're already a little bit nervous. We're always all nervous. And you're really worried that you're going to, pull this off. And then you start talking, and things are going well, and the room seems kind of interested. And then you have a misstep. Something bad happens. Maybe you spill your glass of water, it makes a scene, or you drop your notes, or you catch yourself repeating yourself, or re-saying something you said last page because you mixed up your pages. Where somebody asks you a question that's too close to home, and you feel a jolt. You feel your heart rate jump, your palms become sweaty, your focus sharpens. Sometimes maybe the back of your neck is tingling, and then you might freeze and not know what to do, or you might blurt something out without thinking and then regret that you did that. And now you're really worried because you've just made the situation worse. All right, and now you open your eyes, and I'd like to introduce you to your amygdala. Some of you might have felt this as a physical reaction if you were being really imaginative. The amygdala is a part of the limbic system of the brain. And the limbic system defines your fear and emotional responses at a very low level. In fact, it's the limbic system that's the oldest part of your brain, and we sometimes call it the lizard brain. And a really interesting thing about this part of your brain is it has the ability to short circuit the rest of you. So that when you go into a limbic system response, and especially an amygdala response to fear or anxiety, you feel it with bodily responses like the sweaty palms or the heart rate. Sometimes some people taste it. Some people talk about a tunnel vision and things like this. And what happens is your brain actually disconnects the frontal cortex, and you stop acting like a fully grown adult, and you revert to an instinctive behavior. This is where things go wrong. And this is what messes a lot of people up. And we call it stage fright sometimes. We call it, another name for this is being triggered. The literal meaning of being triggered is when you kick off your amygdala. Luckily, you can take back control from your amygdala. And when you're in a very difficult situation and you get a very hard question that scares you, and your amygdala is triggered, there are some tricks that you can do that help you get control back to your frontal lobe so you become master of this situation again. And this is a very important trick, especially when you're in highly charged, high profile situation. For example, I relied on this once when I had a person who was extremely transphobic and a widely recognized transphobic activist in my face. But by in my face, I mean, this person was maybe 8 inches from me, screaming at me. And then there were 2 cameras filming this situation. And so in these situations, it's very important you don't escalate and that you don't misstep or misspeak. And the trick for this is to reactivate your frontal lobe. The very best thing to do is to wait. If you can wait 6 seconds, it takes away the trigger from your lizard brain, and it brings it back to your frontal lobe. An alternative, if you don't have 6 seconds, is you can do some breathing exercises that nobody notices. One of the more famous ones, if you can control yourself, if you're able to touch yourself is you breathe in through one nostril and you breathe out through the other. Or if you're in a situation where you don't have the ability to do that, you start breathing in through the nose and exhaling through the mouth. And what that does, it takes away the short circuit, or it helps take it away. A second thing you can do, which for me works very, very well, is to visualize a happy or pleasant memory that you've practiced visualizing before. So we know that the brain is plastic, and you can you learn physical behavior from brain plasticity. And what you do is you think of a very happy moment in your past, something you've seen, something, maybe a smell or sound like a song, and you train yourself to associate that with feeling calm. And then when the time comes that you need a dose of calm to take away your hijack of your limbic system, you use those visualizations to calm you back down. It's surprisingly effective. And to give you an idea about how useful this is, I was trained to do this by a psychologist who specializes in training frontline protesters who face off against the police, and for whom it was really important that they weren't triggered by the police, who were unfortunately too often in riot situations or in protests, the police provoke a little bit. And the idea was to have the protesters not respond to provocation. And it works very, very well. So once you're able to master your fear this way and take back control, you're a long ways down the road into being in a happy place when you're having these difficult conversations, because you know that you don't have to be afraid that it's going to run away on you. So if you're feeling calm and you're sure that you've got things under control, you still need the tools to get your message over to the audience. I mean, the whole purpose of being there at that talk or at that meeting, at that interview, the whole purpose of that is to get people to actually listen to you and do what you want them to do, right? And it's very important that you remember that you have a core message, and that your core message, you need to know what it is going in, and you need to make sure that you keep on saying it. Sometimes it's more subtle than other times. Like when you're looking for a job, you might not be always saying, "I'm the right person for the job. You'll have to hire me," because that's no good. It's going to get them. It's not going to impress the person hiring you. But if you're trying to get a message repeated so that it becomes an earworm in everybody's mind without them noticing, you're out there to repeat the message over and over and over again every day, then you better remember to address this with your core message. So for example, it can be you're perfect for the job, or you have an idea that needs funding, or the project is on schedule. You know, don't worry, leader, everything's okay. Or don't worry, stakeholders. Or it could be, you know what, you're trying to like get people to take a stand, maybe to sign a protest or a signature or something like this. And in order to do this, generally speaking, in your message, you need a motivation, something to motivate people. And you need a justification, why that motivation matters. And you need an ask, like what is it that you actually want? And you need a justification, why your ask makes sense, right? This doesn't work in a job interview. That tends to be implied in the process, but in a lot of talks, this is the case. Now I have an example here, right? And I'd like you to consider those 4 points and think about what is what. And here's my speech, all right? And I'm going to give it out in segments. So people are dying of drug overdoses in BC, and it's a real problem. It's a crisis. They're being poisoned because the drug supply is poisoned itself. It's a poisoning problem. British Columbia needs to create a safe drug supply. We have to do this because creating a safe drug supply will save lives as our province stands up the addiction counseling services that'll help get people off of their addiction. So I would love to have this be more interactive, and if somebody wants to propose which part was which, I'm good with that. But I have a feeling that you saw that, you know, the motivation was people are dying of drug overdose. The justification for the thing that I'm going to propose is they're being poisoned by a poison drug supply. The ask is that British Columbia create a safe drug supply. That's the request. And then the justification is it'll save lives while we buy time to do to help people get off drugs. The four components are very helpful, and they work as a double punch. You know, first it's why you want it, and then it's why you have to do it. It's the two aspects of the conversation that you're having. So the core message is very important, and it's very important to be able to repeat it almost automatically when you're on a core message. So for example, in a campaign, when you're a politician, you have the core message drilled into you, so you can just turn any story into a core message using something called a pivot that I'll get into later. So next, very important tool in dealing with conversations that are hostile conversations is the message box. The message box is actually a 4-quadrant box like you see on the screen, which talks about who's talking about what. And generally it assumes there's the proponents and the opponents. Sometimes it's the people pushing for one idea and the people pushing against it or pushing for another idea. And this is the basic tool of getting back onto message. On the left, you have us on us. So imagine we're the dog lobby, right? And we're saying things like, dogs are incredibly loyal. They have an infectious attitude. They're good at cuddles. That's why you like dogs. They make you active because you have to do exercise, and they poop outside. That's a huge feature. While you're pushing that idea, you have probably got the cat lobby. And the cat lobby people are saying cats are clean animals. They're quiet. They're low maintenance. They have no need to be taken outside. And they're easy to train. And you know what? They protect your home from pests. Cats are the way to go. So you have two competing arguments, right? Or two proposals. And then them on us on the bottom right, that's when they're talking about what's wrong with your idea, right? Dogs are barking all the time. Dogs bite people. They're dangerous. Dogs poop. You have to pick up the poop. It's disgusting. Dogs get wet. If you have a dog, you're going to have a wet dog in the house. That's awful. Nobody wants that. That's why you don't want a dog. That's why you want a cat. And at the same time, on the other side, we're out protecting our lobby for dogs to have them be maybe, I don't know, the only pet or the most important pet. And you say, cats are awful. There's cat litter smell. The whole house smells terrible. There's toxoplasmosis. Cats carry mysterious diseases. That sounds scary. Cat hair, hello? Anybody have to like get off the cat hair? This isn't what we want. Wow, that was too quick. So in the message box, basically it's to address the two aspects of a conversation that come up constantly, which is the things you're for and the things that other people are for, and how your idea is better than theirs. And they're talking about how their idea is better than yours. And when you go into a conversation with someone, you always have, especially if you can plan it, you need to plan out your message box to figure out what you're going to say and to figure out what they're going to say. Because if it's like I don't know, if it's like something like the proportional representation referendum, there was the yes and the no, and that's really easy to do. Sometimes there's multiple message box fights between factions because there's more than one idea. That gets more complicated. But the message box, you really need to have it, and you need to know what it is, because you use a message box to see arguments coming. You can see the opponents of your idea come up with their obvious answer to why your idea is bad, which means you can prepare and have something to say about how they got that wrong. So you can already know how to respond to them on us with their ideas against yours, because you know already that they're going to be likely to say this. Now, the Johari window is something else I mentioned. And the Johari window is a bit of a mindfulness tool. It has problems. It's not the best thing in the world, but what it's about is that it's awareness of the situation around you when you're in a conversation and in an activity where communication happens. And on the top, you see the plane, the end of what you know. And on the bottom, it's what you don't know. And on the left, it's what others know. And on the right, it's what others don't know. And here, it's talking about the we're going to be talking about the intersection of awareness and comfort at the same time. So in the end, this is a conversation about authenticity, but how to come across as authentic. As we know, it's not great to be talking to people about things they don't know and can't fact check. And it's terrible to be talking about things that you don't know enough to be sure that you're effective. And so the Johari box is a mindfulness kind of like tool. If you kind of think about it and you think, okay, what are the things I know about the conversation we're talking about? Because if there's the things you know about, then you're on the top of this. And then you think about the things that the others know, and then you put them on the left of this. And then in the top left, that's the open and fair, common conversation you can have with this person about the things that you mutually understand. The idea is that you're much more likely to have a good conversation with somebody if it's centered in a language and in a perspective that both parties or all the parties are familiar with. Sometimes we talk about the accessibility of language when we try to write material so that it can be read by someone who's completed grade 6 or maybe grade 8 or grade 12 or maybe has a doctorate in university. And the Johari window falls into this. As some of us may remember what it was like to read material that wasn't accessible to us, for example, and about how it was hard to understand. Is there someone asking?
Yeah, Morgane, we've got a couple of comments and questions.
All right.
Whoop, whoop. First of all, I'm with Carrie. I am definitely on Team Cat, and Carrie says, I love the cats versus dog example. It made the concept very digestible, and that she confesses that she's Team Cat as well. In fact, when you were saying about the cat, my cat came up and was rubbing up against me like, yeah, they're talking about cats. And then we have a comment from Benoit Brisson. I remember using the Johari window a lot. And he's joking and saying that, or maybe not joking, that it gives him an idea for a future speech. But maybe you want to ask Benoit a little bit about his experience with the Johari window.
Absolutely. Why don't we do that? Benoit, you want to pipe in on the Johari window?
Well, sure. It's especially, I would use that when it comes to in human resources, when it comes to trying to resolve interpersonal conflicts, whether it be with employees, with superiors, and everybody has a different story. And what is myself being the mediator in between, I have my own perception of what the story might be, and I have to tell them what's your input, so that will match what they will provide me, and then what let's say the employee and the supervisor will provide me will then trigger the unknown and the unconscious that will really give me like a clear picture of the situation. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that helps. And the Johari window is used a lot in human relations. And human relations, of course, has that aspect of policing in there, where like one of the two people in a conversation is really vulnerable, usually, or feels very vulnerable. Mm-hmm. A criticism of the Johari window is it encourages people to overshare, and to overshare to a point where people think, oh, why are they saying all this stuff? The idea is that it helps you be vulnerable, and the challenge is to not be too vulnerable. But it's really good to be mindful of the adage, and I think, and this is the question that I try to remember a lot, which when you're in a conversation with someone else, you never know what crisis they're going through right now. And because you don't know what crisis they're going through, you have to be careful always not to react immediately to things that maybe are simply a reflection of maybe of their own trauma or their own crisis. Me, I I deal with this a lot, and I use the Johari window a lot from the point of view of evaluating the likelihood that people are going to scream at me or get really angry or triggered by the things that I'm talking about because maybe it really touches them deeply.
We have got a question here from Brenna.
So when would you use a Johari window versus a message box?
Aha.
It's similar, but you're just saying that there's something that Johari message doesn't. So just wondering what that is.
Thank you. That's a great question. So a Johari window is about perception and about communicability. The message box is about the bottom line. The message box that you're trying to bring out is, this is the thing you're trying to get to stick, you know, like so in your message box, when here, I can go back on here, the cat people, them on them, they like cats, right? Their message is cats are good. And they need, under the Johari window, they need to be talking about cats to people who understand a common set of what good is, for example, or a common understanding of the good things that we're talking about. So it's a little bit, the cat's example is a little bit contrived because it's hard to think of things like this, but I'll turn it in a different one. Over here in my advocacy work, I've done a lot of work going to churches in socially conservative regions and talking to them about how, you know, my message was, you have to support trans kids because their outcomes are better if you accept them and support them. And part of that includes valuing their rights. And therefore, not only do you have to include trans kids, but you have to also protect them in the law because they feel unprotected. And that was like the bottom line. But under the Johari window, I am not of that belief system, let's say, of that group that I'm talking to. And they're not of my belief system, but we do have some common beliefs. So for example, what they know and what I know over there on the open discussion would be things like the most likely present universal messages that religion and philosophy have. For example, don't bite your friends, or be good to others, or strive for a better tomorrow. Things like
Love
this.
thy neighbor.
Love thy neighbor. There's these things that are universal. And so we would work, for example, in a highly polarized conversation where I can't go into, for example, why their religion is wrong, or they can't go into why my whole community is pathological bad people. The common ground where we can go is you have to love your neighbor and you have to look after your children and you have to keep them safe no matter what you think. Safety comes first, for example. And so that would be this open and frank conversation. If we go into the hidden, that could be, for example, that really what I'm trying to do is protect kids of, let's say of that group who are being not as good to children as I wish they were. So that could be my hidden message, what I'm trying to do. And they might not know that. And I might not want to be talking about that today, for example. So we want to talk about the open, clear intentions right here that we all have in common. This is especially good for when there's possibility for conflict. It's also good for establishing authenticity and that you're the same people, right? Which was very important in some of the activism I've been doing to talk about the universality of feelings and beliefs and the right of people to live quiet lives. Okay, I'm going to move on, otherwise we're going to not get to the examples. Now I'm going to go next to my favorite pastime, which is the pivot and practicing the pivot. And I might even try some examples here, we'll see. The pivot is a way of responding to a question that might be on a specific subject when you don't actually intend to respond to it, but you move to answer it on your own terms so you can stay on your core message. So it's a question that was trying to take you out of your message box from me on me over to them on me, right? Oh, you can't see me pointing. I'm pointing from me on me to that one me. And so difficult questions are taking you off message, right? Whether it's an HR question, you know, like, you know, or deflection, or my children all the time, you know, it's time for, you know, it's time for you to do the dishes, child one. Child one immediately says, what did child do to do today, right? Always that immediate deflection of, from my message, you have to do the dishes, to the response, which is their message. It's not fair. It's always me doing the dishes. The other child never does the dishes, never ever, right? And then what you have to do to pivot is, if they ask a question, why do I always have to do the dishes? And your answer is, well, actually, you're doing the dishes because you're doing your share, and you expressed a preference to do the dishes. And now it's time for you to deliver on your promises, because it's time to do the dishes now, and you have committed to be the one who does it. For example, get back onto message, do the darn dishes. Pivot is often the frustrated accuser's accusation that a politician doesn't answer the question. And there's probably some truth to that. You could say that when a politician's not answering your question at the moment, you're asking the wrong questions, because politicians are generally guided on what questions they're allowed to answer on. So if you're asking Minister of Health to answer questions about Minister of Justice, you're wasting your time. It's very difficult to get, for example, one minister to criticize another minister. It's like outrageous. It would be unheard of. In the same way, when you're trying to talk about an issue, you're trying to cross-examine someone on an issue, it's infuriating when they keep on taking your answer and pulling it back around, back to their core message. So a super fun exercise is to argue for core message. And that's something that we, in advocacy school, which I did, we used to practice, which was we'd sit around at the lunch table, and we would have the people who are trying to get you to say something, and then the people who are trying to answer with something else. And you would just arbitrarily pick it. So for example, you know, I don't know, let's see. Can I have two suggestions? I need one person to give me a question and another person to give me an answer. Who wants to contribute a question or an answer to this? So it'll be completely uncontrived.
It looks like you've stumped everybody.
Yeah, it might be intimidating.
Oh, wait. Why are you so anti-dog?
Okay. So we'll go. So you know what? And I'll be actually saying, well, actually, I'm not anti-dog, but I'm allergic to dogs, is my point, right? So thank you for your question. That is a very good question. You'll notice that I'm not repeating the question per se, because it's an attack question. So thank you for your question. You ask a very good question. And it's very important to remember that there is lots of reasons why some people, for different reasons, might not be able to be around a dog. Because as we know, dogs carry the plague, and they are always mangy. And as we know very well, dogs are very dangerous animals that bite people, which is why, as we've been saying all along, and then I could start like pounding on my desk if I wanted to be real, like a labor activist style, you know, this is why it's very important that we allow for dog-free spaces everywhere, except maybe in one room of people's houses where it's always dark, where they could have one cat or dog. You have to not get it wrong. There you go. There's an example. Don't screw up your messaging and say the opposite of your messaging. And okay, moving on.
We're at about 40 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. Use cases. So I would so much prefer to do this with examples, but it's very hard to do this with examples that aren't completely cooked up. So I decided I would read out the key points and invite people to ask questions and then do it. Because we have about, so it's a 1 hour speaking. Is that correct, Louisa?
Yeah.
I need to make
Yeah.
sure. Okay, good. So first, the one we all have in common, the job interview. As a background, I have, I've been a freelancer and a consultant for well, I was that for almost 25 years. I did so many job interviews, and you could tell the ones that went well and the ones that went badly. For example, the job interview that went badly when they were giving me examples, and then I said, oh, you know what, I'll do this example. And I took the example and I got stumped by the example, and they were totally ready to not have me do it. In a job interview, if they want to give you tests, don't volunteer for more. Volunteer for the fewest possible tests. So you have to know the situation in a job interview, right? You have to know the task, the approach, and the results. And there's a term for this, for STAR. And this is the universal answerer of all interview questions that people ask you, except for the ones that are like very, very scary or that you're completely stumped. And what that is, it's the STAR approach to answering a question, which is, tell us about how you handled this situation or something like that, right? You know, like typical job interview question. Tell us how you handled a colleague that was aggressive towards you.
Conflict.
A conflict. That's a common one, right? Another one is
Does Kira have something to say, or?
Oh yeah, I can ask an interview question if you want.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Job interview.
Okay. So Morgane, please tell me about a time when you received a feedback from your superior and that feedback resulted in improvement, whether it be in your behavior or your approach.
Okay. Well,
we're seeing it live.
Thank you. So I am going to completely make this up entirely. So, but of course, to make a good story, the best thing to do is to draw on elements that you're in there, right? So, I remember a leader came to me with a concern that was brought forward by another team member that that my team was not living up to the company's expectations of buy-in to a core company belief, you know? And I was struggling a little bit with that statement because it was in my team that this happened, and the struggle was the contrast between responsibility to the company to stay on core message, right? And to keep conversations inside of the message box of, we're a good company, we do great things, we're wonderful to work for. And at the same time, and to enforce that with my team, but at the same time, I needed to make sure that my team members were accountable. And in a way, when my team members are saying things that are inappropriate, it's on me as well, because I didn't catch that as inappropriate. So it was on my shoulders. I approached it by reassuring my leadership that I would get this under control, right? And and then I went and I spoke to the resource at hand to identify what their take on the situation was and what they identified had happened. And once I had a solid understanding of the situation, I explained to the stakeholder, the resource, about how others might have perceived that message to be contrary to company culture. And then we had a good conversation about how next time I would try to help guide conversations to make sure we don't fall outside of the company structure. And so in our team, we all understood what this was about. And then I because this had to do with the perception of another employee about company culture, and I in the process, I found out who that was. I reached out to the person to express, my regret that this had happened and that I didn't catch it, and that, and my pledge that I would take care of it in the future. And so as a result, the inside of my own team, the perception and the understanding that perception matters and how you communicate things matters has been absorbed an employee understands better where the boundaries are, which is very important. And bridges were rebuilt with the resource that was affected because it was, we expressed not only that this wouldn't happen again and that there was deep regret, but also that, that we understood why this was important. And that's how we resolved the situation. And that's how I explained it with the star pattern. I explained the situation. I talked about my task. I talked about my approach. And then I talk about the result. And I express the results to make sure that my interviewer sees that the result was positive, 100% according to the needs stated by the company, because that's very important. I've seen interviews, and you know what? Once or twice I've seen the consequences of me falling into boasting and inappropriately talking about how I took on my employer or whatever. And it's like, yeah, that's a very bad idea in a job interview, right? Generally speaking, job interviews are about successes. Any questions about the example?
No, we do have a question from earlier, but I'll hold off until you've gone through the other cases.
Okay, so plan ahead, know your topics, know your strengths, know your audience. LinkedIn and Facebook are available to you to do background checks on the people you're going to talk to. When you're doing a job interview, you should find out, how long they've been there, how proud they are of being there, what their last employer was. You might find out that their last employer is a contracting company to their current employer, which means they moved over, so they were at that employer's place for even longer. These are important facts that you can have in your back pocket, just to know about common experiences to talk about.
Common friends can also be very helpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Going in and doing background research. Very, very helpful. Also follow in a firm. Generally, you're there to talk about how you're a good fit. It's good to show by example that you're being a good fit. It is very helpful to generally, you don't want to suck up to them, but you want to be, in a positive, constructive mood. Non-confrontational. I have seen so many confrontational people in a job interview, and I do not understand how they don't understand. This is the opposite of the point. So you use the star approach to pivot to illustration of core message when you don't have a direct answer. You can still take your, and when I gave this example just now, I gave an example that I had to produce real time. So you go to situation, task, approach, and result. Now, a much more rare thing is the press interview. So a press interview is when a journalist calls you up and asks to talk to you over the phone, or asks you to come for a recorded interview, or to sit you in front of a camera. So first things, of course, when it's being recorded for live presentation, it's really high stakes because you have to sound great real time, and that can be really hard. Think about the trap questions. Don't fall for trap questions, because it's when there's a camera in your face and it's being sent live, it's very hard to walk back something you started saying before you realized that it was a trap. Don't hesitate to use the amygdala tricks, right? To get rid of your hijacking of your amygdala as you freak out when they say, I can't believe they're asking this. And I can give you an example. In the 2017 campaign, a journalist started asking me about my campaign regarding a women's shelter, where there's a campaign where I've been trying to get a women's shelter to open up to transgender women. And it's like a very contentious thing. And I remember I had a full-on amygdala hijack during that, and I cried even. And never cry in front of a journalist. And you don't cry in front of a journalist, because the unethical journalists will take you crying and put it on top of another scene or another content. And that's happened to me too, as well. Journalists took a picture of me crying and tearing up because of something, and then they overlaid that photos of something completely unrelated, implying that I was being affected by that other thing. They can really mess with your credibility if you show emotion. And that's a tough thing. You have to really watch emotion.
Morgane, we have a comment from Spring. Spring, do
Mm-hmm.
you want to come on the line and quickly ask your question?
Well, it's kind of taking us back to the previous topic, but if you don't mind, just going back to the job interview, I recently had a job interview where one of the interviewers actually questioned one of my credentials or my experience on my resume, which took my breath away, quite frankly. And I don't know if I handled it well, and I'm just curious how if you have any suggestions around that.
That's interesting. So that's awful, because there's nothing worse than being called a liar, right? To your face during a high stakes moment, like, I just don't believe you. So I would say that a really good way to respond to that is to say, all of my credentials can be demonstrated. I will be very happy to give you the documentation for those credentials, and to give you the contact information to look them up, if that will reassure you. So that's a way to do this, and you note it down, and you make sure you follow up, okay? And you follow up really quickly if you can. So that's one way to do it. But first, before that, right, you really need to take a good solid breath, relax a little bit, think about something good, and think, okay, this was unexpected. And then don't say anything out loud. Think about what you're going to say, and then say it as calmly as you can, because this is a really good time to measure the beats of your speech. Like, talk every little bit to make the point. Maybe not quite so much, but when we're comfortable, we tend to say everything as one long sentence with only one word. And when we're less comfortable, we might, or when we're trained, we're enunciating more. Which reminds me, part of the prep I got for this from the people who are helping me, because I'm in the middle of a nomination race right now to run for office again. So my team people said, hey, Morgane, make sure you speak slowly and enunciate clearly, because Zoom's not good for that. I hope I'm enunciating enough. But I would say, Spring, for these things, you take a breath, you give a moment to not react, and be mindful. If you know that your body has an automatic response for fear, and that there are tricks to address it, then apply the trick proactively. Maybe you don't need it, maybe you do.
And Sanjeet is agreeing with you and saying, use the Obama trick. Actually, that last question could absolutely happen in a press interview too, right?
Oh, I've been called a liar in the press all the time. Press interviews are, look, I mean, my first political interview was on the coast with Stephen Quinn, and I sit down, and I had been on the coast a few times for stuff when I was the chair of the District Parent Advisory Council, and when I was on the chair of the Trans Alliance Society. And these were like advocacy groups, parent or citizen advocacy groups. Radio interviewers are very nice. And I go sit in my chair, my first interview, and Stephen Quinn, right off the bat, barely even says hello, and goes, so you have no experience and you've never done this before. What makes you possibly think you could possibly get elected? Right? And it was this really aggressive, I found it so aggressive, so different than what I'd experienced before, because I was a rookie at politics, and I didn't understand that they're harsher, and that interviewers modulate tone based on what they're trying to do, and he was trying to get me off balance. Okay, keeping on going. So you need to know your audience. Facebook and Google, use those to find out who these people are that are showing up at your interviews. Again, you follow and you affirm your interviewer. Don't hesitate to hijack the moment and kill it. If it's being recorded, if you don't like what you say, forget it, stop, I'm gonna redo that. I'm gonna restate this. Ask your question again. You can totally do that. You can also clarify. If you think you said it wrong, you say, I misspoke. Let me say that again. Non-confrontational, it's very important. You use stories, illustrative stories that involve people or animals or places really get the point across. So that means a lot. But if you're going to talk about people, make sure that either you have their consent or they can't recognize themselves in your story. Because if they can, it can be harmful. And don't forget that sometimes there's only one person who that happened to in the whole world. So they know exactly you're talking about them. And again, be very friendly. Even if it's an awful, awful subject, stay courteous and nice. Okay, the question and answer.
Okay, we are ready with April Soon, who's a member of our club.
Sure. In the Johari window, you have things, you have a box for things that you don't know. So how do you prepare for things that you don't know? Do you canvas other people?
It's tough because it's not only the things you don't know, but it's the things they don't know.
Right.
And here, actually, this box on the bottom right is basically where we talk about privilege and where we talk about bias and we talk about all the bad things that I do a lot of advocacy about. They're all in the bottom right window. Either they don't know why they have those feelings or they don't know those things even happen, and I don't know they know those things or those things like this. So the idea of the Johari window is to try to see how far you can expand the top right box without falling into the dangerous places. Like, I'll give you an example. Let's talk about the anti-mask crowd, right? They were parading in front of my house with their signs on Saturday, I think. It was Saturday. And they were against masks. And they don't know a whole lot of things that many of us do know, right? We believe that the science behind the policy is sound. We believe that this is the best guess. When there's a guess, we believe that the stuff is being done for our best interests. They do not know that this is true. If they knew it was true, they would agree with us. So that's not a, for example, if we're going to be talking about, if you're with someone who you know is possibly an anti-mask person, but you're talking about the best time of the year to mow your lawn, you probably don't want to start talking about how, well, since you're wearing a mask anyways, and so forth, or something like this. You know, you don't want to talk about all the bases of the things that you take for granted, knowing that they are someone who probably doesn't believe in these bases because they don't believe in other bases that you take for granted. It's a tough one. The Johari window is, it's more like of a warning about how if you're not in the open, clear communication where everybody understands, people are being left out, and when they're being left out, you never know what the outcome is going to be of the interaction. And you want a positive interaction that goes your way. That's the whole point of the meeting you're in right now, when you're doing your lobbying or when you're talking to your leader or things like that.
Thank you.
We've got one more question. I don't know if you wanted to wrap up and take the question separately or to take the question right now.
I'm good. I was going to keep on going. Q&A was actually a use case. The question and answer session. So, you know, you've just presented to 200 people and somebody comes up your hand and says, you obviously haven't read my book about the subject matter because you're completely out of your range. Why did you choose this thing or whatever, right? I speak from first-person experience. I got asked that question by a senior professor at the university where I did my first ever public talk. So it's been seared into my head, that thing. So think ahead about what the trap questions are going to be. Don't feel forced to answer the question in a Q&A session. You can answer part of it and pivot onto back to your message, or use your question as an example of why your message is right. Okay, so in a Q&A session, you repeat the question, but you paraphrase it so that you don't repeat the part of it that is hostile. Every time you repeat someone, you're affirming what they're saying. Don't affirm the hostile part. Take, like, wash it down for reasonable. Try to limit your answers to 1 minute because you want to get through as many questions as possible, but also because you'll lose people. Also because someone might be taping you and a long answer gets boring and nobody's going to listen, and they might take you out of context. It's hard to take a 1 minute answer out of context. Always have someone ready to intervene at Q&As, especially on sensitive issues. The person intervening in hostile places holds the microphone. So you can take the microphone away from a rant, because a question and answer isn't necessarily a venue for others to rant. Again, use stories with consent or anonymize. Very important, always very important. Be very friendly, again, and set a limit on outrage. So this is something I have to think about a lot as a very public facing person. You have to set a limit beyond which you're just not going to answer. You're going to refuse, you know, you're going to stare at them blankly for 10 seconds and shake your head a little bit and say, next question, please. You don't owe anybody an answer to a hostile or offensive or oppressive question. And you have every right to tell that person you want them to leave the room. Like if it's offensive, get rid of them. Show that you have a backbone. Don't be afraid of them. Their offensive question was a trap. Be very friendly. But if it goes out of hand, show that you aren't a pushover. Just do it, you know, cleanly. And big complicated questions, always offer to follow up at the end of the meeting. It shows that you're interested. They rarely show up anyways. And if they do show up, it gives you an opportunity to bridge and to really create some dialogue, because the people that will bother to show up to follow up at the end really actually are interested in a conversation, and they're not just there to trap. How are we on time?
We have just a couple minutes left of the Q&A time period.
All right.
And the question, you actually answered it. It was on how to approach disagreements or conflict. So well done there.
Yeah, I'll go a little bit further in there. It's rich to have, like, it enriches a conversation to have disagreement at a question and answer. Unfortunately, today, there's a lot of tone policing, and people get a lot of negative blowback from dissent in a public event, you know. And there's the way I see it, there's a big difference between a little bit of dissent and a hijack. And you don't want to let people hijack your event. But if they have a question that doesn't agree, I think it can be really good to answer them. But on the other side of that, if you want to go out and ask questions, and it's about a fairly polarized subject, I recommend strongly you don't voice yourself. You don't voice your statement, your question as a statement of dissent. You express your dissent in the preamble of your question as you ask the question, and then you ask the question, and you really make the question easy to answer so that they want to engage with you. Because if you make the question too difficult and you're obviously an essayer and you're obviously a Guinness, then what they're going to do is they're going to just shut you down and move on.
Fantastic.
All right, any more questions?
It looks like we're good.
Okay, well, let me finish off by just thanking the Toastmasters Advanced Orators. It was a treat to come and give this presentation. I hope it went well. I'm looking forward to the grading. That's going to be humbling.
Well, I am going to ask everyone at this point to unmute themselves to give you a big round of applause. I think that, and if you want to, I will cancel the spotlight. You can take off your slides. I wanted to also thank Morgane for all of her knowledge and the sharing, answering the questions. It's fantastic. I would like to open it up for people to give Morgane some comments and feedback on how did she do? Did she hit the critical messages? Did she answer your questions? Was it what you expected tonight? And how could we have improved with this particular evening's presentation? And I will ask if there's a volunteer. Is there anybody that would like to start with some comments or thoughts for Morgane? Okay, we've got Benoit. Benoit, please unmute yourself. Come closer to the camera and go ahead.
All right, so thank you very much, Morgane, dear fellow Toastmasters, most welcome guests. Tonight we have had a very seasoned speaker, which is Morgane Oger, that I also know personally. She's good at what she does and she knows how to deliver. My only nuggets of improvement would be really just to pay attention on the ums and ahs, those we call them as crutch words. Otherwise, that was very thorough, very concise, and very easy to follow. So my kudos to you, Morgane, and I look forward to actually see you again. Thank you.
Fantastic. Nadia, I noticed that you're on the call. Nadia is a seasoned Toastmaster. And what did you think about tonight's presentation? What are your golden nuggets for Morgane? Not that it's a McDonald's commercial.
Thank you, Louise. Fellow Toastmasters, club members, and Morgane, thank you so much for that presentation. At first, I was invited here by Louisa tonight, both to the club and especially to your presentation. And I wasn't sure what I was coming to listen to. And as you started off speaking about communication and all the different ways in which you can communicate in difficult situations, I thought you took a rather, and forgive the word dry, but a rather dry topic and spinned it in such a way that it was absolutely brilliant. You were able to allow the listener to listen simply because you have a very calming voice, a very mild tone, a very calm approach. I think your pitch and your volume lends itself to this particular topic in such a way, but it's not just because of the topic, it's because you live the topic, you are the topic. You brought all your personal experience to bear upon the topic. And so I found myself so intrigued by everything you were saying and listening to learn as opposed to just listening to hear. And so I thank you for that, for actually spinning my whole mind around and being here this evening after a very tiring Thursday. If I had to tell you anything, I would say your slides actually were very brilliant. But if I had to tell you anything, and I really don't have to tell you anything, I would say to you, just bring some humor to your slides. Maybe, as I said, I had put that in the chat for you, some cartoon, maybe a little more color to your slides, because your slide was the focus of our visual whilst we're on Zoom. So just to liven that up a bit would absolutely be something that you can use if I had to say anything. But again, I thank you for taking such a very difficult topic and allowing us to listen to you throughout that 53 minutes. I was listening for the entire 53 minutes, so thank you.
It didn't feel like 53 minutes, did it? By quickly. Yep. I've been watching some of the faces as they were watching, and Sanjeet, you've been very engaged in what was being said. I could see you taking notes, and I think it would be awesome to hear what you saw, felt, and heard tonight. Okay. Well, for now, why don't you type a message to Morgane with your feedback, and in the meantime, let's go over to Kira. She's also been quite animated this evening, and I would love to hear what you have to say.
Hi, Morgane. I know Morgane personally, known for the last 3 or 4 years. I've also been interviewed in the press, but it wasn't in an antagonizing way. And I haven't been approached with difficult questions yet, but I'm sure it'll come in time. I also have a presentation coming up in a month on the day after Thanksgiving. So I'm preparing myself for that speech as well, and may be facing difficult questions. So I really enjoyed the tool set that she gave us today. I'm also at a volunteer organization. I volunteer at an organization that deals with Chinese conservative traditional senior citizens that are possibly anti-trans and anti-sex workers. So because my association with my nonprofit organization, maybe the Chinese community may be approaching me to deal with difficult questions. So the tools that you gave me would really help me deal with the press and deal with the presentations. So I really find the nuggets that you're giving us very valuable, and I will definitely treasure it for a long, 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 long time. Thank you, Morgane.
Awesome. I would like to open up to Catherine. Catherine is also a member of our club, and she was here this evening. So Catherine, what did you think, and what's your feedback for Morgane?
I was late as well. However, I was right away to engage to her presentation because of all the slices and her voices. I like her calm voices and all the pauses that keep us thinking of what she's trying to tell us. I would like to see her again, and also glad to see all the members. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And, you know, the pause is something that is opportunity for you to gather your thoughts, but it's also an opportunity for your audience to absorb what you said. Some people will repeat the phrase to give it emphasis, and others will just simply stop so that you remember the last thing that was said. It gives people's brains a chance to catch up and to go, oh, this is an important thing. And Morgane, you did that throughout your presentation. I think it's natural. It wasn't maybe planned out, but it definitely is a great technique to use. Is there anyone in the group that has got any questions for Morgane regarding the techniques that were presented today, or any other thoughts or comments? Oh.
I've got one.
Good. Go ahead.
Morgane, how do you, if it's not recorded and it's live stream and you screw up on a response, how do you, because you can't roll back and can't recover, how do you recover?
Thank you for your question, Kira. What I would say is that you're always able to repair what you've said by stopping and to say, let me clarify this. Let me get this right this time, or something like this. Or just to say, you know what, I misspoke. Hang on a second. Here's what I'm actually trying to say clearly. And then you say it clearly. The thing though is the second time around, don't screw it up, because they're not gonna like put up with, you know, 5 repairs of your thing. But they're forgiving. Now, you can also, you know, if they cut you out and take away the repair, you can complain to the CRTC that they are misrepresenting you. Which, you know, in my line of press work, having that threat is important, because sometimes they're really unethical. But Kira, basically, take your time. And I have found that assuming that the reporter is an ethical person has served me well, and that they understand, they want to know what you really think. There are awful reporters out there, you know, if I think of, you know, the sites like Life Site News or Feminist Current, they'll go out of their way to trip you up, but the real reporters, they will give you a chance to do it again. And just conversationally say, oh, I said that backwards. It's the cats. The cats are in charge. Or is it the dogs?
Nadia, go ahead.
Morgane, you talked about advocacy school. So during the break, I was looking up advocacy school. Tell me some more about advocacy school.
Okay, the United Way of Canada has a program called the Public Policy Institute, and that was where I cut my teeth on convincing lawmakers to do what I want. It's like a 3, maybe 4 month. I think it's a 3-month program, 2 days a week for 3 months. You have to apply for it. And the school teaches you, first of all, when you're asking for public policy change, the limits of what the people on the other side of the table can possibly do for you. For example, never ask a minister to do anything ever. They're a trained mouthpiece, nothing else. They actually have no say on what the policy is. You know, you have to go to the deputy minister. That's the one that does the things. For example, tricks like this. And then they run you through, you learn an elevator pitch, you do the 20-minute presentation, you learn how to do a one-pager, and it's very useful. Another one, if you're involved with labor has something called the winter school. I don't know where you are, Nadia, if you're in the Metro Vancouver area.
Yes.
If you are, and if you're associated with a union, the unions organize something called the winter school. It's a big deal. And in the winter school, you learn advocacy, like fundamentals in a full-on training program. Very, very good. And then, you know, advocacy school is also simply hanging around meaningful, established advocates and helping. There, you learn so much from your elders, your advocacy elders, you know, so not necessarily older, but more effective than you, and seeing how they how they get their stuff done. Very quickly, you learn there's the reactionaries, there's the activists, and there's the advocates. And these things, you get involved in a movement that you care about and watch and see which ones are screaming all the time, see which ones are always angry, and see which ones are always getting meetings, right? And the ones that are always getting meetings, you hang out with them. They got something and they need your help, and then they'll teach you because it's in their interest to teach you.